Welcome into a live Inside Carolina podcast. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's Jason Staples, as always, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt. Today we talk football. Today we talk the North Carolina defensive back room. If you're a member of the Tar Pit Premium message board, and of course everybody here should be, but if you're not, certainly subscribe and get all the perks that come with that. But one of the big perks is Jason Staples doing his yearly scouting reports, position by position, player by player. And we are starting that. The content on the message board started on May 19th with the introduction and has proceeded each day thereafter until today when the Thaddeus Dixon scouting report hit the Tar Pit Premium message board. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about it. In years past, we've sort of reviewed what you've already read on the message boards and on the stories. We're going to do this a little bit different. We're going to sort of have some superlatives and have 5 categories, and then we'll take a couple questions from the chat if folks have them. I see that there's already one good one in there that I will pull. Joshua Fernandez, you're going to get the first question when we get to that point. But Jason, let's get started here just so folks can understand the process. North Carolina has, 15 people in the defensive back room or thereabouts, several of which, and we can list them, don't have enough snaps really to evaluate fully. And we can go through those, but just sort of in a nutshell, let people know how you go about doing this scouting reports on each of these players.
So one of the first things I do is I want to take a look at as much film of these guys as I can. And to what extent I have all 22 in the secondary, especially, that's where I'm going to go. And I've got some. I don't have every game of every player, especially this year where a lot of these guys are from all over the country, different places. And my all 22 library is not unlimited, but I want to take a look at what they put on film first and foremost, and then there are times where I need a palate cleanser, so I'll go and I'll take a look at somebody else that I know, like, okay, Jalen Ramsey's really good. I want to see what I want to remind myself of what Jalen Ramsey looked like in college. I want to go back and take a look at, Sean Taylor. Sean Taylor was really, really good at safety. I want to take a look at Sean Taylor. So there are times where if I feel like I'm maybe losing my taste a little bit, like, well, everybody looks great, then I want to go back and I want to look at what great really looks like, right? So that's another part of this process that I'll do on occasion. And sometimes I just want to look for comps. Like, okay, this guy seems to have this and this, but, it sort of reminds me of, and then I want to go and take a look at somebody that he reminds me of. And like, is that really there? Is he really as fluid as that? Oh, okay, so he's not quite as fluid. All right, so that's what that looks like. So you do a little bit of that. And you're trying to evaluate where he was, what he was asked to do, the guys that he was going up against, all of those things. And you're just trying to watch as much as you can. Now, some of these guys, you're going off of fewer snaps than others. And so you're, extrapolating a little bit more. Some guys, Gavin Gibson has 945 snaps in his career. At this point, he's kind of what he is. Will Hardy is 864 snaps. Now, sometimes you have to put those into context. You say, well, Will Hardy, of those 864 snaps, maybe 200 of them were healthy?
Yep, 100% healthy.
So, and I don't know that even 200 were 100% healthy. I'm just talking about like not really legitimately majorly impacted. Nobody's healthy after about the first 2 weeks, but then other guys, you look at a Gregory Smith, for example, the transfer from Florida. He's a guy, he's got 100 snaps, and he played quarterback for 3 years in high school. And you go, okay, well, how much should I extrapolate based on what you see in terms of limitations and all of that on the film versus, what the traits are, those sorts of things. And what was he asked to do? So that's the process. And then I'm working on evaluating the traits that I can see, and then seeing how that fits within the larger scheme. And then I'm going to list strengths and weaknesses, and then, try to put ratings up to give some indication of what level talent you're looking at.
So if you're looking on these scouting reports, there's an index on the pin on the Tar Pit Premium message board. But just so folks will understand, Malcolm Ziegler, Patterson, Waters, the safeties, they were They didn't have enough tape. We can talk about them, but there's not enough tape. Like Jason said, hundreds and hundreds of snaps. Also, Ty White, Trey Miller at the star position, and then Jalen Thompson, at the corner position. Those are the guys we will not specifically talk about in depth with here in this section. But everybody else, Gregory Smith, Coleman Bryson, Will Hardy, Gavin Gibson, Caleb Cost, Ty Adams, Marcus Allen, and Thaddeus Dixon. There is a full and complete breakdown on the Tar Pit Premium message board if you haven't already read them. I'd wager most of you guys in the chat right now have done that. But Jason, let's start. We sort of came together with 5 areas we wanted to talk about, and rather than going through every individual player, but let's start at the top. We're going to start at the alpha dog of this group. Watching this tape, watching and evaluating this film, seeing these guys on the field, some for, you mentioned a few hundred snaps. Some have over 1,000, some have almost 2,000 snaps. Who is the alpha, in your opinion, going into the season of this defensive back group?
So interesting thing there is I think the alpha is Thaddeus Dixon, but there's a sneaky chance that with the coaching change and some of the help that a little bit more help that he's going to have over top, I think from better safety play, I think Marcus Allen's also going to be a guy that may really take a step forward this year. I bumped him down a little bit compared to my rating of him last year because, I kind of baked in last year the kind of upward trajectory that he'd been on. But, he's a guy that I still think has a lot of tools as well. I think both of the outside corners are in the mix to be the alpha guy. But if I'm having to choose between those two going into this year, knowing that one of them has already played in this defense under the coach that he's playing under, and that he was, honorable mention All-American or all Big Ten last year, I'm going to default to him. He also, put up just a little bit better coverage numbers overall last year. And on the tape, I think the biggest difference is that Dixon is just a little bit more fluid in terms of his turn and run and just his footwork off the line of scrimmage. He's a little more polished and a little more fluid there in terms of his lateral agility than Allen. Now, I think Marcus Allen is actually faster in a straight line than Dixon. So they bring different things to the table, and they're both long guys. They're both long corners with 6'3+ wingspans, and so they're going to be pretty good. I think the bookend corners that they have will be among the better corners in the ACC. I thought they were last year with Huzzy and Allen. I thought they were a pretty good pair last year as well. But they didn't have a ton of support around them in the defense. And I think this year, in terms of the back end, at least, I think it's a little bit better around them. So it allows the alphas to shine a little bit. But if I'm having to pick one guy, it's going to be Thaddeus Dixon. I think he's the guy that is more likely than the others in the secondary to generate turnovers. He consistently got his hands on the football and finished last year. There were a number of places where he got a pass broken up, got the ball batted in the air, and somebody else got the interception. There were a couple cases where he was in phase and got his head around and went up like a receiver to get the football. And that's really been the difference between him so far in terms of production and Marcus Allen, who has been in position a whole bunch and then just he's had a lot of guys make great catches over and around him at times. And you just kind of get frustrated, like, dude, you just got to finish. And if you can ever finish, you're gonna really make a lot of people happy. But I think he's close. I think Dixon is just a step further along in that progression. And like I said, a little more fluid, a little more in terms of polished ball skills to generate turnovers. So he's the alpha, but I think both outside corners are really, really good.
Yeah, a couple great points you make there. The coaching change and the different styles of coaching and the different coaching abilities there and the way they go about it, but also playing in the defense before, I think is a good thing. And I think, Jason, your point about the safety help and corners having safety help, I mean, it all starts in the trenches ultimately, but it sure helps to have guys on the back behind you that are going to be where they're supposed to be and be able to make a play. Moving on down the list, we're going to do this. It's not alphabetical, but it sounds alphabetical, and I didn't throw it up on the first thing. I'm about to put it up there. The breakout player of this bunch. North Carolina, Could Marcus Allen be a breakout player, even though he's already been really good for North Carolina? Your take here on which of these guys that we've talked about or that you've scouted can be that potential breakout player in 2025?
So I'm going to skip over Allen because he's had 1,800 snaps, and I think he's been pretty good over those 1,800 snaps. So for him to be the breakout player really doesn't fit the spirit of what we're getting here. The interesting thing is I'm going to actually go with a guy on this that I did not do a report on. And that's because when I went back through, I have a little bit of all 22 from the Practice Like a Pro event. Now, some of that is really, really difficult to comb through because there's no numbers. So what I found myself doing in a number of these things is in working through the scouting reports of the players that were there for the Practice Like a Pro event, I actually started combing through the the various photo galleries from the Practice Like a Pro event from inside Carolina, where we had some really good ones, and even from other outlets. I scoured through every picture I could get, going to guys' social media accounts to see if they had pictures posted of themselves from that day, to figure out, okay, who's the guy with one sleeve on? All right, that's okay. So that's Dixon. All right, who's the guy with two Carolina blue sleeves on? All right, so I'm taking notes on like who's what guy, and then going back and trying to who these guys are. Did I just break up a little bit? You disappeared there for a second.
Yeah, you broke up a little bit, but it's still rolling.
Okay, so what I did is I'm trying to figure out like who am I looking at here without numbers, and then once I kind of figure out, okay, that's that guy and that's that guy, then I started watching those guys. Well, there's one guy that there was really no film of because he's only played 10 snaps, but he was really good in the clips that I've got of the Practice Like a Pro all 22 in the slot. And so I think there's a real chance that Trey Miller actually ends up becoming a guy that jumps forward and takes some snaps in the slot this year. And that would make him a major breakout to go from 10 snaps to actually being in the legitimate rotation. But what I saw from him was a lot of quickness and ability to mirror some of the quicker slot receivers and such that Carolina had on the field there. And, you're looking at a lot of the other guys. It's hard to say that, Gavin Gibson with almost 1,000 snaps under his belt, or a Dixon or a Marcus Allen, that those are going to be guys that are going to be breakout guys because they've just had too many snaps to really break out. But going from 10 snaps to, I think Trey Miller's probably going to have 300 plus, maybe 400 plus snaps this year based on what I saw, because I think he's going to be in contention to be in the rotation, if not starting at that nickel spot. And that would have reverberations through the whole defensive backfield. Interesting thing is I think there's about 3 guys in that nickel role that are going to play, and there's 3 or 4 of them that are in the mix to take any one of the sort of back 3 positions in the 5-man defensive backfield, whether the nickel or the 2 safeties. There's at least probably 5 guys that would not surprise me, maybe 6 guys that would not surprise me if they started at one of those spots. And they're going to mix and match to find their best 3 back there. I think the 2 corners are pretty well established. I think all 3 of the other jobs in the back end are up for grabs.
Yeah, that's an interesting point there, and we've seen turnover, we've seen basically tryouts during spring and then things like that. I'm sure it'll be a work in progress, but to your point, the corners are pretty much set. Everybody stays healthy. Those are set. We're talking with Jason Staples here on the Inside Carolina Live Scouting Report, the breakouts, the alphas, the defensive backs, the back end of North Carolina's defense. Of course, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but it's Johnny T-shirt that sponsors us. I'll get to that in a second. Jason, young buck to watch. It's in the transfer portal world. It's kind of difficult to have a bunch of young guys anymore, in these sports because everybody, wants transfers and gets older guys. But North Carolina's got a couple young guys on this roster that I think could be really good. But you're the expert. So tell us, after watching all of this and looking at all these guys, which of these young guys are going to be the ones that step up this year?
So I already mentioned Trey Miller as one of those guys that would fit that category. But because I've already talked about him, I'm going to go to Malcolm Ziegler. He was another guy that I think got a lot of time with what seemed to me to be the one defensive backs in the Practice Like a Pro event. And you can see the frame and the range from him. That guy can run. And there's one thing that Belichick really likes on the back end is he likes guys that can run well enough to take away the deep stuff and to create turnovers. And I think Ziegler, with his combination of length and speed, is going to be a guy that probably, in terms of a young buck that you want to watch, is in that mix. And again, that may not mean that he starts every game, but I think he's a guy that's going to be in the rotation. And the thing is, this is one of the crazy things. The answers to those two are guys I didn't do reports on because I had 15 snaps to go on. But I'm looking at it and I'm going, oh, well, if I had 50 or 60 snaps to go on here, maybe 100 snaps, that guy might be in the lead for me right here. So there's a couple of those guys that are kind of in the mix there. And it makes this roster really intriguing on the back end because you've got that mix of experience. I mean, I think Will Hardy is going to be a starter on the back end, most likely. I think Gavin Gibson is going to start at either safety or star. Then that third spot is up for grabs if Gibson is at the star position, which is what it's the Belichick-Saban terminology for the nickel. It means the position that used to be the Sam linebacker, basically. But I think Gibson may start there, but if he doesn't start there, and let's say Trey Miller or Caleb Cost start there, then I think Gibson probably starts at one of the safeties. But then if Caleb Cost isn't starting at nickel, then maybe he actually moves back and plays safety, which I think he did some this spring. You've got Gregory Smith, who's going to contend for some time. And then again, Ziegler is a guy that I think is going to have some opportunities to win some snaps there and maybe eventually win a starting role. And I haven't even mentioned Coleman Bryson, who, I think he's right there with Will Hardy. It was close enough between those two that it took me a while to figure out on the film, okay, which guy's which. Now, I think Hardy's a little faster than Bryson. Bryson's a little thicker. And they bring a little bit of different stuff to the table. But I think, again, you're going to see more rotation on the back end with some of this, especially early in the season, than what we've seen as they figure out who their best five are. And the other thing that I noticed with Washington, and we'll talk about this when we get to talking about the linebackers, Belichick at Washington, Kamari House was a part-time player. He played specific roles, had specific packages when they wanted him as his specific set of skills at linebacker to play. And I think you're going to see some of that in this secondary where, let's say you're playing against a team that likes to go four wide, really spread you out, and they've got some real speed at the two slot receivers. They may bring a completely different set of primary safeties and nickel into that game than they might play, let's say, against a team that wants to ground and pound, where they, maybe put both Bryson and Hardy, bigger safeties, on the field together with Gavin Gibson at the star because they want to stop the run. So I think there's going to be some week to week adjustment depending on who's able to do what. Ideally, you'd like your five to be the guys that can do all of it. But I think you're going to see with this group a little bit more mixing and matching, most likely, than what we've seen, just because of the mix of guys that they have. And I think some of the younger talent, some of those guys are more talented than the guys in front of them. It's just a matter of figuring it out, gaining the physicality, and ultimately taking the job. They're probably all about a year away, but those guys are going to be interesting. There's several of those young bucks to keep an eye on and watch.
Absolutely. North Carolina's got some talent back there. And to your point, they're going to mix and match them, and they're going to play them in different schemes or different approaches to it and make it work and figure it out. Again, talking to Jason Staples, I've been terrible on the banner, so I got to get better on that. But let's go. Time to prove it. Now, this is a guy I think I might know who you're going to pick. We did not talk about this beforehand, so I'm not going to guess and embarrass myself. But time to prove it. What player on this list in the defensive backfield that it's time to step up and take that next step from being, a contributor, a decent player, to more than that? Who you got?
I think that's Marcus Allen. I think he's the guy that he's got NFL potential. That guy could play on Sundays, but he's got to prove it. He's got a lot to prove in that respect. He's been close. He's got to play with the physicality. He's got to play with the finishing that he's got to do there. But I think he's the guy that has to prove it, in the sense of just taking that one last step to become a top-notch, not just one of the better players on the team, but one of the best players in the conference. He's got the physical tools to get there, but he just hasn't finished, hasn't taken that last step. This is his free agency year, as it were. This is his contract year. This is the opportunity for him to do that. I imagine you were thinking of Caleb Cost, but
Indeed,
Caleb Cost would be second on that list, because he actually led the defense in snaps last year. He played a ton and played generally pretty well, but there were a lot of situations. I mean, he was asked to do some things last year that were not really in his skill set. I mean, I'm thinking specifically of some of the situations where he was asked to play inside leverage one-on-one against a very fast slot receiver. I mean, great example is at Florida State. What in the world are you asking him to do? He's a guy that runs probably 4.61, somewhere in there. You're asking him to play inside leverage against a slot receiver, off coverage at that, just slightly off, inside leverage against a slot receiver who ran like 10.8 with no deep
fail.
With no deep help. Like that's a complete setup to fail. I think he's a guy that it's going to be really interesting to see how he fits in Belichick's defense and how he's used, because he does have, I mean, he's a smart player. He's a really good athlete. He's just not as much straight speed as what some of these guys are. It's going to be interesting to see where he fits and how they employ him and make use of his skills. So, given those questions, I think it's less of a put up or shut up for him. It's more of that for Marcus Allen, because I think Allen has a chance to really step forward and be, a top line player in the ACC, given his physical tools, and he wants to play in the NFL. It's time for him to show it.
Staying there just for a second, when you have a cornerback like Huzzy on the other side or Thaddeus Dixon on the other side, is there more pressure on you to be, Marcus Allen on your side, knowing the ball's coming your way more, or is it a good thing? I don't. Dre Bly had however many interceptions, 11, 13 his freshman year, and he didn't get him many afterwards because he didn't throw that way. Would you rather get balls or not get any work over there if you're a corner looking to make an impression?
Well, it depends on who you're talking about. There are some corners where the mentality is such of, oh, please, I beg you to throw it me all game.
This way.
Please. Some of those guys, like, that's the way they live. And those are guys who have complete amnesia when they get beat. Because the thing about playing corner, you're gonna get beat. You cannot. Like, I can pull up multiple examples of where Deion Sanders, who I think most of us would agree he's the best corner to ever play. There are places where Deion Sanders got worked. It happens. Jerry Rice ate Sanders alive more than once. But that's also freaking Jerry Rice. You're going to lose some to that guy. And Deion won some of those matchups too. And, that's the thing is you have to have that short memory, and you have to basically live for the opportunity to make them pay for coming your way. And if you're Marcus Allen, I'm looking at this as an opportunity of like, man, I got to get my hands on the jugs gun all off season. I got to make sure I'm hitting the speed bag. That's one of those things that I learned actually from Dre Bly, believe it or not, years ago. Dre Bly talked about how hitting a speed bag helps coordinate your hands and your eyes for catching a football better. And I found that when I hit a speed bag on the regular, that my hands actually were more reliable. So, I'm hitting the speed bag. I'm catching as much as I can during the summer. I'm working on getting my head around and doing all sorts of things to work on my ball skills, because I think teams are going to come after me a little bit, knowing what they know about Dixon from last year, and knowing that some of these guys have had some success against me, even though I've been in position, and I want to finish, and I want to see if I can get 7-8 interceptions this year. and then maybe make him throw at the other guy. That's what you want if you're that kind of guy. Other guys, they just take pride in pitching a shutout. Dion actually used to talk about this. He felt that he had most done his job when he pitched a no-hitter at corner. If he finished the game with a clean jersey and clean pants, then he said that means I did my job today. If I didn't have to get dirty, because that means they didn't challenge me. So that's that kind of guy as well. Now Dion, had earned that reputation by that point, but some guys, yeah, they feel the pressure. They feel like, okay, they're going to try to pick on me. They're going to, and they get up on that. But you really have to take that as a challenge of like, okay, well, I'm going to make you pay. You have to take that mentality.
Talking with Jason Staples here. Let me talk about Johnny T-Shirt, johnnyt-shirt.com right fast. Sponsor of the show, great friends of Inside Carolina. Look, live show last night. We had a baseball live show. JC, YouTube subscriber and Inside Carolina person, got a prize pack from Johnny T-Shirt for dropping a great question in the chat. We'll do that more often here on these live shows as we go forward. But check out Johnny T-Shirt and johnnyt-shirt.com, the sponsors of our website, our podcast, and they give you 10% off your orders. Jason, ranking the room. This is probably premature because you haven't done all of the other scouts yet, but this defensive back room, it feels to me that it's going to be better. And I'll run this question that Hunter Pierce asked in here as well. Do you expect better performance from the DBs because of improved talent or improved coaching? Now, I think there can be an and in there. But your take on that and then how this room ranks on the North Carolina team and maybe in the conference.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, first of all, answering Hunter's question, I think that's a both and. I think I want to be fair because I think last year's defensive staff was a good one. I think Jeff Collins is a good defensive coordinator. I think both defensive backs coaches are good defensive backs coaches. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. It was overall a pretty good staff, but those three, they're pretty good at their jobs. But I do think the way that this staff has been put together and the fact that it's Belichick that are clearly running this defense essentially, and then everything kind of works their way down from there. I think there's going to be more. Things are going to be a little bit more in alignment on that side of the ball. There's no real room for miscommunication because everybody's just doing exactly what Belichick are telling them to do. Right? It's like a law firm. And the other thing is, I think, we've heard some reports about the connections with the players from the defensive backs coach, specifically in the safety room, have been a little bit better. And that certain things, they're going to run some complex stuff in the back end, but they found ways to teach it that have simplified it so that guys feel like they can play a little faster. So I think that's going to help. I think the biggest difference between this year and last year in the secondary is just that you're going to get overall better safety play and nickel play. Because and on the interior of the defense, essentially it's going to be better and a little bit more reliable. And they'll be able to do a little bit more in terms of mixing coverages and all of that because of having all of that straightened out. I think some of that is a combination of having just simply more bodies and more athletic bodies on the back end. So, when you have 5 guys that realistically could start at any one of those positions on the inside, one of them is going to figure out a way to actually win that job and play reliably. Right? That's the idea. And a bunch of these guys are really good athletes. And then you combine that with, I think, what's going to be a well-coached secondary. I think they're going to be a little bit better. In terms of ranking them in the conference, that's tricky. I don't think they're going to be as good as Clemson. Miami, both Miami and Florida State probably have a little bit more overall talent, but that's iffy in terms of the corner and safety rooms. I think the safety room at both places may have just a little bit more athleticism. That's debatable. SMU lost a few guys. They've added a few guys. I haven't looked enough at everybody, but I would say this is probably a top 5 secondary comfortably in the ACC in terms of the mix of bodies and what I would expect from coaching. It could be as good as top 3 because, for me, you start with the corners. And I think Dixon and Marcus Allen have a chance to be a top 3, maybe, pair of corners in the ACC. I think Syracuse is going to have some good defensive backs as well. But I think when you start with 2 guys that can actually play single coverage and you can rely on to do that a good bit, that gives you a lot of options, and not everybody has that. Like I said, Clemson's got a really good back end. Their secondary's, I think, the best in the ACC. I think Florida State, with the addition of the transfer corner from Houston, whose name is escaping me, they've got a lot of talent in that in their secondary as well. As bad as they were last year, the talent in the secondary is not a problem. Miami added a bunch of talent, but I don't know that those I would take necessarily those head and shoulders over, say, Dixon and Marcus Allen, and then some of those bodies at safety. There's enough talent to make it interesting. I just think there's maybe a little bit lower floor for Carolina at the safety and nickel spots than there are at a couple of those other places. But I would comfortably put Carolina's room, say, top 5 or 6 going into the season in the ACC in terms of defensive backs. Now, I do think in terms of the defense, they may have as good as, top 2 or 3 defensive back room in the ACC, but that's their best room on the defense. The linebackers and the defensive lines are not top 5 groups. So let's be careful not to take this to places where it might go if we're not putting that up front before we do those videos. But I do think that you're going to see overall better play from the secondary in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, it's all relative. You got to have defensive lines and linebackers, or you don't want those guys left on islands for many seconds, or it'll get ugly. Walter Holt asked about Marcus Allen. Coach Hawkins obviously has a lot of confidence. We've seen the social media tweets from Mondo Hawkins about Marcus Allen. We've talked about him here. A ton of talent. Coaching is going to help him. The new coaching style and the new coaches is going to help him. We'll see if he can step up and answer the bell there. Last question for you, Jason, so we can get out of here. I had 30 minutes on my mind. We never make our time. It's like,
We've done it a few times.
Once or twice. But Joshua Fernandez was in here first, was in here before we even started and went live, and he dropped a question. Who's the most versatile defensive back on the roster who can play all downs, help in run support, surprise blitz, similar to Boykins? Boykins obviously transferred out. Last question for you, Jason. Which of these guys you looked at, and there's a lot of them, is that most versatile guy that can do it all, can be a 4-down or 3-down, nickel or star or safety that can do everything on the field?
I think that's Gavin Gibson. The transfer from ECU. He's a guy that could play either safety. He could play the nickel star role, which is where he played at ECU. And he also, if you really needed it, he can play corner. He's not, he would not be a top half of the ACC corner. Like, the drop off between Dixon and Allen to him at corner would be very big. But he can play it. He's got the speed. He's got, good enough hips to be able to play it if you really needed him to. And he was a reliable nickel slot type player at ECU, and he was a guy that they actually used a lot to blitz and in run support there. He was a solid blitzer. Had actually a key sack against NC State in the postseason exhibition game, which they beat NC State, as you recall, but he had a key sack in that game. And you could see a lot of that versatility. And then you put him on the back end, you put him at safety, and he's bringing the cover ability of a star or a nickel type guy to the safety position, but he's almost 200 pounds and, actually does play with a bit of a chip on his shoulder and some arrives angry here and there. Though I'd like to see him actually be a better tackler overall. There are times where he kind of ankle bites where it's kind of frustrating. But there are times where you can see his willingness to take on blocks and all that you would expect from a guy who's playing in the box at safety. And again, over the top, he's got enough speed. So to me, Gavin Gibson is the most versatile guy of this group. And he's a guy actually I think they brought in precisely because they can move him all around and, kind of use him as a guy that, let's say you line him up in the slot and then they motion and all of a sudden he's playing center field free safety because they motioned and, you just adjust down and you're not letting them get matchups that they want because you've got a guy that can kind of move around. And there are a couple of those guys on this defense. You're going to see guys line up in more places than just where they're listed on the depth chart because of how they'll check and different coverage looks and different things against different teams. So, but like I said, Gibson is a guy that I expect he's probably going to be in the starting lineup, and his versatility gives them a lot of flexibility, I think, on the back end.
That is the North Carolina defensive back room. We've covered corners, safeties, stars, nickels, whatever you want to call them. Just a ton of players, ton of talent for North Carolina, a ton of new coaches, ton of new faces. If you haven't, like I said at the beginning, check out Jason Staples' scouting reports. There's a nice index. You can get to all of them, or they're all, pretty extensive threads on the message board as well discussing it. Jason will be doing linebackers next. Got a handful of new guys there as well. It's going to be interesting. Scouts there. We'll be back to do one of these shows after the linebackers. Then where are we going? Linebackers, edges, defensive tackles, offensive linemen, running backs, tight ends, wide receivers, quarterbacks. It's football in May and June. A ton going on at Inside Carolina. Shout out to Basketball Videos 99. Yes, I'll be back on the baseball beat tomorrow. Carolina and Holy Cross at 12 noon in Boschheimer Stadium. Love some baseball. Can't wait to get back out there to see it. Was there today. We'll be there tomorrow, hopefully all weekend. Jason,
those boys got a chance this year. They got a legit chance.
It's a good baseball team. If you're in the area in Chapel Hill, you need to get out to see them play. It is good quality college baseball, and Carolina's one of the best in the country. And it'll be a great atmosphere out there.
Yep.
Johnny T-shirts always available at johnnytshirt.com on East Franklin Street or whatever. And we'll be back. Jason, it's always a pleasure.
This is fun.